Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
There was an old Crowded House song called 4 Seasons in One Day. This election felt like 3 different campaigns in one. Hello, I'm Brian Lilly. Welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. We're going to take one more go around the track with our Political Hack newsletter writers, correspondents, editors, Tasha Kiridan and Stuart Thompson from National Post, and dissect what happened and try and make sense of it all. Welcome again. What a weird election. From beginning of the year, a surefire conservative majority to now it's going to be a surefire liberal majority to what the heck just happened on Monday? Stuart?
Yeah, well, it's kind of insane that we had all this tumult in the Canadian political discourse, and now we are in a situation where we have a liberal minority government probably propped up by the NDP. So here we are again. I think that's probably the story of the election. And the story is, I mean, the psyches of the people involved. I can only imagine if you are a Conservative MP or if you're Pierre Poilievre, how you feel. I think it's almost relief because I feel like they could have been beaten even worse, but also they're thinking back to December when they were worried about, you know, what if we win too many seats and we have a caucus that's too big and unruly, and they were thinking about stuff like that. And then you have the Liberals, who I think they were playing with house money all spring, and it's even for them, they have this missed opportunity where I think the majority was on the table. I think they lost a couple of seats around the GTA that they probably should have won, and they now have to deal with a minority when I think a majority was for sure possible. So here we are, back where we were not too long ago.
Tasha, your quick thoughts?
Well, I think the biggest surprise was Poilievre losing his seat. That was not expected, though there were rumors he was in trouble, but by 4,000 votes, it's a lot. I think that changed the game on a lot of things. Echoing some of what Stuart said, you know, I think the Liberals could have gotten a majority. I was still predicting minority for a couple of reasons. One is that the Conservatives traditionally have what's called a ballot box bounce. People who don't say they're going to vote Conservative, and then they do. And so that adds a couple of percent to their total, and that could put them over the top in some ridings, as Stuart mentioned. So that could deny the Liberals their majority. And that's kind of what happened, but not for the reasons people thought as much. The NDP and the People's Party, no one's talking about the People's Party. They should, because they completely collapsed in the selection. And the combination of those two parties collapsing gave the Conservatives the seats they needed in Ontario and BC to deny a majority to the Liberals. It's very interesting. The Conservatives are a very different party than they were before. So that is one of the other messages in this election. So the fact Poilievre lost his seat after he rebuilt the party to this, you know, new coalition of people that could have potentially won maybe a minority. I don't think a majority, but maybe after the tea leaves changed after Christmas. It's quite something. It is like an unseen or unforeseen development in Canadian politics, and I'm just waiting for the next chapter. It's going to be rock and roll from here on, I'm sure.
Tasha, I read your piece on the PPC and the NDP collapsing. I mean, my view is the People's Party had evaporated over the last several years. They had gone away.
Now, they had 5% in the last election, 4.9% of the total vote. But it's when you break it down by ridings. In some ridings, they had 12% of the vote in 2021. And Poilievre cannibalized that. After he became leader, it faded away. You're right. But that means that voter base shifted somewhere. And I'm pretty sure it went conservative. I don't know where else it would have gone. And to me, it explains a lot of the way they carried on their campaign, why they didn't bash Trump earlier than they did, because 2/3 of the PPC voters have voted for Trump. And also some of the issues they raised in the last week of the campaign, things that were kind of disconnected, everything from, the sort of the plastic straws, reversing that ban, to locking up criminals, like hard language, stuff that would resonate with that audience. And everyone was wondering, why are these things coming out when Trump is all of a sudden making noises and that should be the focus? And no, because they had to consolidate that vote. In some ridings, that did make the difference, because you had 10% of voters, and Roman Baber's riding was a perfect example. They didn't even run a candidate there, the PPC. And so those people had nowhere else to go. And the idea was, we got to keep them in the fold, keep them motivated. So I really do think it's a new coalition of voters, including a lot of Gen Z and millennial angry, and they could be living anywhere, right? They're not necessarily in rural parts or in exurbs. They're angry voters. But the point is, a conservative party is very different. And Poilievre really created something. Like he worked hard on this. And he thought that this new coalition of voters could win. And they were, until Trudeau left and until Trump came in. But really, when Trudeau left, Trudeau was the glue that cemented that group of voters, plus a whole bunch of other people, including some liberals who just hated Trudeau. So when that fell apart, it didn't work.
Stuart, as we're talking right now on Friday, we have yet to hear from Pierre Poilievre since the election. We don't know what's going to happen. I've heard from the caucus members, as I'm sure both of you have, that they don't want him to go anywhere. They want him to stay on. But apparently he hasn't even called Bruce Vanjoy to say congratulations on winning Carleton. He's not talking to anyone that I can tell, although apparently calling up caucus members. But wider than that, doesn't appear that he's talking. What happens next with him?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do remember we did some reporting for an election wrap piece, just the big piece about the whole election. And I don't think this made it into the piece, but one of our reporters in the Bureau was talking to someone who said, what will Pierre Poilievre do if he loses? And the person kind of half jokingly said, well, he will go into a dark place for a little while. And I think that's fair, because this is
I think that's what anyone would do to a degree.
It's his life's dream, too. This is a guy who's been planning for this since he was 14 years old. And not only that, it is his local riding. I know that he cared a lot about that. And he had a lot of pride in the fact that that was not an easy riding. This wasn't Stephen Harper's Calgary riding, where you never had to think about it. This was a riding full of public servants. Ottawa is, depends on where you are, but it's probably generally a left of center city. And it actually took some really hard work for Poilievre to win that. And I think he got spooked in 2015 when it was pretty close. So I think he does deserve some credit for maintaining that riding for as long as he did. And something I think larger happened in Ottawa that he was swept away. And it might have been the Freedom Convoy stuff. It might have been people worried about public service cuts or whatever. But that was a trend across the city. I think the Conservatives will get together on Tuesday at a caucus meeting, and they will probably have some kind of airing of grievances. And then I don't know how it'll go. I think it'll be really interesting to see how Poilievre reacts to this, whether he has some contrition, whether he admits some mistakes, whether we see some staff members go. I think that will tell us a lot about his demeanor in the next couple of years.
Tasha, should he stay on? Does he stay on? You sound like you want a different Conservative Party back, a more moderate one, run by a moderate like Aaron O'Toole or Jean Charest, which, by the way, the media would just call far right anyway, and would still denounce them as, I love those discussions. Well, I mean, these aren't moderate Conservatives like back in Brian Mulrooney's day. Talk to people who were in Mulrooney's government, and they were described in the same terms: fascist, Hitler, far right, all these things. doesn't matter how moderate you get, you're still going to be labeled all these things. But what do you think should happen?
That I worked in Mulroney's government, as you know.
Far-right fascist, you are.
In fact, actually, no, I was considered far-right because as a young conservative, yes, the young conservatives were pushing for things like tax cuts and, locking up criminals. We actually, I remember, had a package of reforms we wanted to bring in that were really tougher. Some of them echoing some of the things Poilievre is saying today. And we were called the fascists. We were. The party, I don't remember as a general rule. The Westerners, had a big beef with Mulroney for lots of reasons, as did the Quebecers after a while. But putting that aside, what I was actually writing about, I haven't come out and said that we need to return to that big tent party. That's not my takeaway. My takeaway is, can it still work? Because this didn't work. And I don't think the voter base is there for this experiment to work, what Poilievre did. I think he's in a dark place because he really thought he was going to refashion the party into a party that would be of the working class, of the left behinds, of people who were not getting a voice, the little people, like he said, the people who, the waitress and the trucker and the tradesman and people who don't have access to power. And I genuinely believe that he felt that he wanted to create a party that was in that image to be a voice for these people. And it didn't work because the numbers aren't there, especially the fact they didn't get any seats in Quebec. Quebec was the reason the Liberals won. Quebec didn't buy that argument from Poilievre. They didn't twig to that. They went.
I would argue that he didn't win because he didn't win in Ontario.
Yeah, he didn't win in Ontario because there weren't enough of those seats that, like I said, that could be flipped.
There are, but you got to be willing to talk to Doug Ford
or he didn't do that.
around him.
But Doug Ford isn't that. Doug Ford doesn't disparage people in suits. This was the error, I think, is that Poilievre's slogan, boots not suits. It's not boots and suits. It's boots, not suits. And this told a lot of suits they weren't wanted on the voyage. And I've talked to people in his riding too. And I heard two things. One was, Freedom Convoy and civil servants. And they didn't like how he handled the Freedom Convoy. But second, he wasn't there. And he didn't put his boots on the ground, so to speak. He wasn't in the ride. He didn't show up. But
he went from being the guy that was at every event to being at no events.
Well, yes, and there's also redistribution. But the idea, the first piece, though, is the boots, not suits, is that if you start disparaging people because they work with a laptop, they're a civil servant, or they're a business person or whatever, and you say that they're not the ones who built Canada, because it's literally what he said, is that the people who built Canada are those with, the hammers and the tools and things like that. You're driving a wedge right there, and it can work if you have enough people on your end. But he didn't, and he drove away those moderate voters. He literally drove them away, and they didn't vote for him. They were pissed off. So, once they had no Trudeau in the picture, they could vote for Carney. And that's what I don't think he understood, is that as long as Trudeau was there was this illusion that moderate voters would come over. You wouldn't have to pay any attention, and they'd be there anyway. Well, guess what? They weren't.
Let's talk about the conservative infighting.
Meow.
It was the first column I wrote after the election because of these comments here from Jamil Giovanni.
I do want to ask you, Mr. Giovanni, because you've just spoken to your supporters, a large group that's here at the pub here in Bowmanville, North Oshawa, and you said to them, among other things, that Doug Ford was a problem for you in this campaign. You said that he sabotaged the Conservative campaign. That's your words. You said he was a hype man for the Liberals. Take me through how you see that.
Yeah, well, look, Doug Ford just went through an election. I have differences of opinion with him. I don't like how he's managed healthcare or education. But out of respect, we didn't say anything. Federal party, we didn't get in his way. When it was our turn to run an election, he couldn't stay out of our business, always getting his criticisms and all his opinions out, distracting our campaign, trying to make it about him, trying to position himself as some kind of political genius that we needed to be taking cues from.
Was it him specifically? Was it his campaign manager, Corey, tonight? Do you see Doug Ford as a problem for the federal party in the outcome of this race?
I see Doug Ford as a problem for Ontario and for Canada. I think he's not doing a great job in running this province, and now he's trying to exercise his influence over other levels of government, and it's not like this guy is doing anything particularly well.
So that was Jamil Jivani settling scores on election night, talking to CBC of all places. Conservatives don't do that, and he would probably excoriate other conservatives for talking to CBC. But there's Jamil blasting Doug Ford. Look, I get people being angry at what Ford and his campaign manager, Corey Tonight, did, but Jamil Jivani has spent the last couple of years taking nonstop shots at the Ford government. He has been at war with Doug Ford for years. And the infighting, there is plenty of blame to go around. Should Ford have done what he did? No, but people around Poilievre, not Pierre, but the people around him spent 2 years coming into Toronto, going to events with the same donors that Ford has that are also supporting Pierre, and trash-talking Ford loudly and denouncing him, not taking on any staffers if they've worked for the Ford government, not taking on candidates if they've had anything to do with the Ford government. This is idiotic. Not even having a relationship with Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. This was a bad idea from the start, but what do you do with the infighting now that it's out in the open? Looks like Jivani wants to have a purity test for the Conservatives. That's subtraction, not addition, and that's not how you win in politics. You win with addition.
I'll just start by saying that if you really know these people, which I think all of us do, and kind of know how far back this goes and all of the interpersonal pettiness that's been going on. This is a month of public infighting that's been going on for 7 years. And I think that, it's one of those things. When my kids are fighting, I don't try to figure out who's more right and who's more wrong. I just say, stop it. Stop it now or you're going to your rooms. And I think that's where we're at with this, is that figuring out who's more right and who's more wrong. As a journalist, I missed that Jamil. I know Jamil and he does that and it's very entertaining. But if I were in the political party, I would not want people doing that. And I think we have a bunch of people, whether it's Poilievre, Doug Ford, Corey Tonight, Jamil himself. These are people who lack, Jenny. There are people who lack a little bit of self-discipline when it comes to this stuff. And I think that over the years in politics, most of these people learn just keep your mouth shut. And like you said, Brian, I've heard from the Poilievre people a million times, we're not going to be like Doug Ford once we get into power. We're going to really do stuff. We're not going to just be the fourth term of Kathleen Wynne. We're going to actually do conservative things when we get in there. And as much as they weren't saying that publicly, it was a refrain from inside. And of course that gets back to the Ford people. And of course that keeps the bad blood going. And I think what all this comes down to is that they just need to learn to get along. There was no reason to take a shot at Tim Houston, of all people. And then all of a sudden, you have this relationship that's fractured that never needed to be. And then you have 2 days of news stories that you would rather not be dealing with. And you have 5 or 6 days of Doug Ford news stories you'd rather not deal with. So I hope they've learned a lesson. We've been doing some reporting on this. MPs have been saying we need to work on our relationships. And I think that's exactly what they mean.
Tasha, I'll ask you to use this as the jumping off point on this. By the end, Ford obviously didn't care because he did a big interview with Politico that was published the Sunday before the election, trash talking them again.
Yeah, I read that. And I think that it comes down a lot to personalities. I think in the conservative camp, it's a management issue. There are Jenny Byrne and people who work with her, and they have this attitude of we govern by fear. And that is how they rule and they roll, and they send people notes saying, you'll never work again. And this is common currency. This has been happening for years. This is how they run the shop. So people put up with it as long as they were 25 points up in the polls internally, because everyone wanted to be in that shop. But then when things went south, the grumbling, exploded, really did. And I think that's where Corey Tonight went out on his limb, which I'm sure was sanctioned by Ford. I don't think that was, just him deciding to say these things and negative things about the party. But internally, I talked to lots of people who wanted to be candidates or were working for in ridings, raising money, selling memberships with the idea that they might be eligible for being a candidate. They were treated like garbage by the party. They weren't even called.
The tax finance minister wanted to run.
Yeah.
Is it Gerard?
Sorry?
Is it Eric Gerard? Is that the name?
Yes. I think he was one of the people. There were other people there. There were other members of the Ford government, apparently, also Ford cabinet ministers who wanted to run, had been rejected by the party. I think the Conservative Party. What I never understood about this campaign, one of the mysteries to me, was they didn't have star candidates. They didn't make an effort to get star candidates, like people with really big names. They had some people who were well known, maybe in their community, for example, or in certain circles. I think Billy Morin in Alberta, for example, who is quite a high profile Indigenous leader. But they didn't have people that the average person would know or that had served before in other governments, had experience, like Carlos Letao, who is the former finance minister in Quebec that Carney poached, right, or attracted. Those types of people. And I think the reason is because they want to control everything. And when you do that, you end up with a B team. You don't have an A team. And then you end up with, Ford on his side, trash talking them. Well, it was just ugly. And I don't think Ford doesn't have an agenda. Lots of people say, oh, well, he wants the top job. That's why he did this. Until he goes and does French lessons in Jonquière, I won't believe that. But I do think that perhaps he wanted Carney in the chair because he's thinking, if I'm Premier of Ontario, who's going to be better for my province? Who's going to be easier to deal with? Poilievre has never even called me. What do I want with that? Why would I want him to be prime minister? I want to get support for the auto industry. I want to get subsidies for this, that, and the other from the feds. I want to get, things go south with Trump. I want an ally. That's Carney. So, this is no mystery. Like, I think that was the agenda, not a leadership issue for Ford. I think really it was, you know what? I don't want Poilievre to win because I'm going to have to deal with him for 4 years, and that'll be a nightmare.
Is there space for Poilievre to turn around if he stays on, to eat some humble pie and say, you know what, I'm going to go out to Etobicoke. I'm going to hang out with Doug Ford. I'm going to actually meet Tim Houston when I'm in Nova Scotia. I'm going to reach out to people like Peter MacKay and not only get his advice, but work with him in the next campaign. Peter MacKay was out there, but not in any official capacity from the party. Peter was doing what Peter does because he wanted Central Nova to turn blue again, and it almost did.
Yeah, I think this is the key question for me, is that I spoke early on in the campaign, I spoke to somebody who was near Ford, and they said, look, Pierre Poilievre he views relationships too lightly for a politician, and he's not good at keeping them. He's not good at cultivating them. And I think that might just be his personality. Like, he's kind of a bookish guy. He likes policy. Likes to be in his own world. And even someone like that, when they try to be, the Brian Mulroney type, it doesn't quite work. It's really hard. I think I'm kind of like that too. I can't pretend to be something I'm not. And Pierre Poilievre probably can't either. So it really just depends how much he can do himself to do this, to reach out to people and establish these connections, because politics is so much easier when you're not making enemies on your own team.
Well, about 5 different ridings in Brampton could have flipped from Liberal to Conservative easily with one phone call to Patrick Brown. And that never happened. And Patrick Brown was willing to put his machinery behind them.
He trashed Patrick Brown in the leadership. He sabotaged Patrick Brown. You can't get a personality transplant. This is the problem. I agree with Stuart.
But Doug Ford and Patrick Brown fought like cats and dogs until Ford was premier and Brown was mayor, and now they get along.
But Doug Ford is not Pierre Poilievre. To Stuart's point, Doug Ford is a natural-born politician. He is a guy who, he could dump on someone and then he'll make up with them. He can say, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for that. He is not an ideologue. He is much more mutable and affable. He's the guy who picks up his cell phone when you call. Poilievre doesn't do that. Poilievre is not like that. And, Stephen Harper wasn't either. Stephen Harper was also more introverted, bookish. But Stephen Harper wasn't abrasive the way Poilievre is. And Poilievre made it his shtick to be abrasive. It was his thing. He was the leader of the opposition. He was the attack dog. Harper wasn't like that. some people, didn't like him. By the end, of course, he was unpopular. He'd been in office for 9 years. But he wasn't like that. And I know that a lot of fuss is being made right now about comments that Bob Fife made on the National, where he said people went to the doors and they said that in Pierre's riding, and they said to the candidate, they said to people who are going on behalf of Pierre, I'd love to vote. I agree with what your party's doing, but I'm not going to vote for your leader because he's I'm not going to say it, right?
He's a dick.
But he's a dick. Okay, well, podcasts aren't censored, I guess. Fine, he's a dick. And that's what and he's getting so much grief for saying that on air. But you know what? I do believe that was said. I have heard that from other people in the riding who said, go door to door, and they just don't like him. And I think that's not, again, it is because they don't feel that he likes them enough to make that effort that Stuart's talking about, that personality piece, to cultivate a relationship. And relationships in politics are the glue. Brian Mulroney knew that. He had a list of people he would call every day. Someone, how are you? How are you? How's the wife? How's this? No, but and people would be sick. He would call them. He sent me flowers when I gave birth to my daughter. Okay, I hadn't spoken to him in a while. It had been a while. He sent flowers to the hospital when I had my daughter. How nice is that? The nurse didn't know who he was. It was funny because, it's like, oh, they're from Brian Mulroney. And she's like, who? She was young. She had no clue. I was like, oh, that's so touching. Yeah. So that's the kind of guy he was. I would see Pierre sending flowers to people. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I've heard from several people that the first phone call they get after a loved one passes is from Doug Ford.
There you go.
Including people that he's had odds with politically. I mean, he now has a whole bunch of his former political opponents working with him as mayors of major cities in Ontario.
But that's because he makes the effort too, Brian. He picks up the phone. He doesn't wait. He wants relationships and not just because they're transactional, but because I think genuinely he's that kind of a guy. He's the good old boy. He's a guy who likes to be on he likes to not fight with people because he believes you get more done, and he's just that way. So it's a natural thing for him.
What about the NDP and the Bloc? They both disappeared to a degree in this election. Blanchette most likely not facing any leadership struggles. He'll continue to bounce along. But Jagmeet Singh, well, he did the smart thing and resigned. We're going to have Avi Lewis step forward trying to take over leadership, even though he lost to Hedy Fry. I think that is maybe a disqualifying position in my books, but the NDP does love losers. So Avi Lewis will step forward. Will Wob Canoe? Thoughts?
God,
no. Oh, wow. Okay. I'll let Stuart go first, but I know Avi Lewis, so I will be commenting after that.
I just can't imagine going from running an entire province to being the leader of a caucus of 7. It just seems like that is a huge demotion. And if you're Wob Canoe, you must be thinking, why would I do that to myself? So I wouldn't do it if I were him. I think he'd be crazy to do it. I think Rachel Notley would be crazy to do it also. So they might be scraping the bottom of the barrel here.
I think you're right on Wob, and he is getting a lot of compliments, a lot of attention for being a stable, moderate, prairie New Democrat, and maybe that's a model for whoever does win to follow. Avi Lewis, I don't know him, Tasha, you do. I'm told he is one of the nicest guys.
He's a sweetheart. I worked with him for 4 years, after 3 years at CBC, producing his show. That he had a show. I was one of the producers on it, and he was lovely to work for. Smart, very nice guy, and very very, very ideological, very committed from a base of knowledge, though he wasn't, just spouting stuff off. He had read, and his wife, Naomi Klein, is also, of course, extremely well published, well read. Like they come from a place of conviction on their ideas, which are hardcore socialist. And so they would be on the really hard leading edge progressive. I don't think so. Here's the thing. The NDP's got to make a choice. Do we go hardcore progressive, or do we get back the Labour vote we lost in large part to the Conservatives? And as long as Poilievre is leader of the Conservatives, they are not going to get the progressive vote back. Even if they dance in the streets, they are not, because it's going to stay with Carney because they don't want Conservatives to have any shot at anything. So the trick is, if Poilievre does leave, if the Conservatives for any reason become more moderate or whatnot, then progressive NDP could start prying people away from the Liberals again. But in the meantime, that's not going to work. And I don't think that there's enough voters of the hardcore progressives, even in cities, for them to come back in that. So I wish Avi luck. He's a great guy, but I don't know if he's the thing that the party would need right now.
Leap Manifesto, yay.
Yeah, I know, right? Wab Kinew would never write the Leap Manifesto, never. But Wab should stay in Manitoba too. He's yeah, I agree with Stuart on that.
Yeah, Brian, can I just point out that you can see the peril facing the NDP in the fact that the Conservatives poached 17 seats from the Liberals, but they also poached 10 seats from the NDP. So the NDP is losing it on both sides of their voter coalition, and it's not obvious, as Tasha says, that those progressive votes will come back to them. So it's pretty dire.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, where does Canada go from here? Carney and Trump getting along like, well, not cats and dogs and dogs, I guess. Back in moments.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by Buick. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Buick Certified Service Fresh Start Tire Event. Visit Buick.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
Donald Trump, of course, was a central character in our election. Just after the results were in, he held a cabinet meeting and reacted to what unfolded north of the border.
Are you interested in rebuilding relations with Canada? And if so, how?
No, well, I think we're going to have a great relationship. He called me up yesterday. He said, "Let's make a deal." You know, he was running for office. They both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. He's a pretty liberal guy. But no, I spoke to him yesterday. Couldn't have been nicer, and I congratulated him. You know, it was a very mixed signal because it's almost even, which makes it very complicated for the country. It's a pretty tight race, but he's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly.
So there you have it. He said they both hated Trump, and the one who hated Trump less won. I'm not sure that's accurate, but he really seems bothered that Poilievre wouldn't say nice things about him. But he seems genuinely happy with Carney. Sasha, is this going to be a good relationship, a bad relationship? I'm sure you saw the reporting that John Ivison had that Carney had said on his first call with him, "You're a transformative president that I want to work with."
He is a transformative president, and I have to work with him. So there you go. I don't think he was lying there, you know. I have no idea because none of us can predict what Trump will say tomorrow. Carney will be sitting. I'm looking forward to watching that 2-shot in the White House, Carney and Trump. And then on the other side, the whole Vance and the rest of them sitting there on the sofa looking like this and see how that goes down. Because, it can go great or it can go totally sideways like Zelensky. I don't think he'll be Zelensky by any stretch. But I think that, Carney is used to dealing with people in those circles. He's done that for most of his career, people who are leaders of countries and high levels. And so he's not going to be uncomfortable in the chair, in the role, but how he'll be treated by Trump, today, tomorrow could change. You never know. So I'm not going to even predict this.
I think Macron and Starmer have shown him how to do it and come out
Well,
unscathed.
this is the thing, that it's not how you do it, though. It's what's in Trump's head from 5 minutes before. And so that's why I don't want to make any predictions. I think Carney will give it his absolute best shot. I think he's very well equipped to deal with Trump, like you said, because he has other friends who've dealt and he knows, and he's got the skinny on how that went. And so he's probably he's the best person to do it. It's a question of just the wild card is Trump, and who knows? Who knows?
Stuart, are you expecting a good meeting, or maybe a WWE SmackDown in the Oval? What?
Yeah, well, as a journalist, you know what I'm hoping for. But Trump is a funny guy, though, because he is quite mercurial. And I have noticed that every now and then he just takes a real shine to someone. And it's not always rational. It's not ideological, because it's not always left-right kind of stuff. And I wonder if maybe that's what's happened with Carney for whatever reason. And I think with Trudeau, I think we are slowly starting to realize that he just hated Trudeau, and that a lot of this comes down to some pretty colossal mistakes by Trudeau, where he made some comments to Trump that I think really hurt us. And I think for Carney, he has to really make this be the thing he does well. I think that's probably everything is riding on that. So I think they'll throw whatever they have at it. And like Tasha says, you just have to sort of toss the coin and hope that Trump's mood is good that day.
Okay, let's play another clip. This is from a Fox News interview. Brett Baer interviewing Jameson Greer. Now, if you're not well versed in who is who in Trump world, Jameson Greer is the U.S. trade representative, and he is the one negotiating all these new trade deals. And so he's in the middle of big negotiations with South Korea right now, with the United Kingdom, and hopefully soon Canada. So here's Greer saying good things about Carney, taking a shot at Trudeau, and then the interesting part at the end is on manufacturing.
He essentially ran on being anti-Trump and talked a lot tough about what they're going to do retaliatory. How does that go with Canada?
Well, I think you heard today the president in the cabinet meeting talked about his interactions with the new prime minister, and he said they've been positive. They had a call a few weeks ago as well, and they were positive. I think the new prime minister is a serious person. It's not the same experience we had with the old Canadian prime minister. And the president very much wants to have a healthy relationship in North America. We should have more manufacturing in North America. We need to have it in our hemisphere. And we'll see how the relationship goes. It's really at the leaders level with the president and the prime minister, but we stand ready to engage it.
So you had just mentioned, Stuart, that, look, Trump didn't like Trudeau. I don't think anyone in the administration did. You heard the comment there. What you didn't see was him kind of laughing, smirking, as he said the former Canadian Prime Minister wasn't serious. So they do view Carney as a serious guy. What I'm hopeful for there is that Greer was saying we need manufacturing in North America. I'm hoping that the serious guys like him are getting the message from business leaders and other elected officials, including Republicans, that, we want more manufacturing here, but we don't need to take it from Canada. We can't replace those auto factories up north. We can't replace the other factories. We don't have the manpower to do it. We can't even, we couldn't have people fill all those jobs if we wanted to. I'm hoping that message is getting through when you hear comments like that from Greer.
Yeah, I will say that when I heard the phrase North America, it filled me with like a wave of relief, because that's what we haven't heard. And I think Trump has just sort of naturally seen the world as zero sum. I think that's just the way his brain works. So his natural instinct is that if something goes well in Canada, it must be taking something away from us. And global trade doesn't really work that way. And I think maybe the tariffs, just the reaction to the tariffs economically and politically, maybe has taught him that this can be good for everyone. If we have an automotive industry in North America, we can all benefit from that. So I think those guys realize it, and I think that is sort of slowly taking shape. You've seen the tariff stuff kind of ebb away. There's exemptions coming, and without making any Trump predictions, which I think is a bad idea, I think hopefully we're getting into a better place here with that.
Well, unfortunately, some of the layoffs have already happened. Friday morning, 1,000 layoffs at Oshawa's GM plant. A whole shift gone there. We have to hope for that to come back. But One thing that Doug Ford heard when he was in Washington, Tasha, was that they wanted to start negotiating with Canada as soon as possible. So what does Carney do here? Does he go in and say, yeah, let's make a deal, let's get serious on negotiations the way Starmer has for the UK?
The sooner we can get negotiations going, the better. Absolutely, because that will limit the damage that tariffs could do to our economy, and that also uncertainty will do. See, this is the thing. I mean, you saw as a reaction to the potential of tariffs, retailers buying up stock. A flurry of economic activity back in February. People just terrified and like, oh my God, in March too. That's just, so it's distorted markets, it's distorted supply chains, put lots of pressure on them. It's created uncertainty for consumers as to whether they should buy and not buy. What's this going to cost? Like, it's just, uncertainty is bad for business. It's bad for everybody. And those distortions, they if they go on too long, or if there are more that come, it's also bad. So let's all get along, as we said earlier, right? Let's stop, find a way forward. And I think, yes. So I think negotiations sooner rather than later. He's got to put together Carney. Maybe we'll hear, this. He's going to have a press conference on Friday. He's going to say something about, his team. He has to put together a team of people. There's talk that there will be a new ambassador to the United States. There's some talk that could be Jean Charest. I've heard that. We'll see. But the point is, he's going to probably put some people in there who have some really heavy experience with dealing with these kinds of issues. And so he has to do that first, get the team together. But then I say full steam ahead, go and start trying to get a deal, because it's best for everybody.
I think I haven't heard Jean Charest for ambassador, but that would be interesting. I think that post in Washington, we have to stop putting career diplomats there. Everybody I talk to says wonderful things about Ambassador Hellman, but she could not get meetings for people in February. I'm not sure if she decided she didn't want to get meetings for people. But Premier's asking for meetings with elected officials, and she couldn't deliver. That's why they all hired lobby firms to get them things. The person in Washington has to be a political person. They have to know the insides of how politics operate, not from a diplomat point of view. So whoever goes there, yeah, I'm all in favor of a retired politician, a former premier. I think that is key. Internally, we've got fractures, though. And now it's in Western Canada instead of Quebec. Carney, during the campaign, did not offer an olive branch to Alberta. And perhaps if he had, we would be talking about 5, 6, 7 seats in Alberta instead of 2. There was a lot of hope among the Liberals that they would be able to break through, especially with the addition of the 3 new seats, the redistribution of the ridings. How does he broach this very delicate situation with increased talk of separation? I don't think most Albertans want separation, but they do feel, even ones that want nothing to do with that, do feel like their province, and you hear the same in Saskatchewan, is not treated with respect.
I remember when Kenney came to power in 2019, and I spoke to someone in his office, and they said they were just flabbergasted by the separatist sentiment that was going on. They didn't realize how bad it was until they got in there and had, the internal polls on that. And, as much as Danielle Smith, people in central Canada are criticizing her for some of the stuff she said and did during the election campaign, a politician, a premier, has to kind of reflect that, or at least try to absorb the sentiment in the province, because if you let it fester, it could get even worse. And I think that Carney has a responsibility here to help Danielle Smith out with that. They don't have to openly get along, but Carney has to do something. And I think the problem in the last decade is that Trudeau saw too much advantage in keeping this rift open, and that is an electoral wedge. And I think it was good for the Liberals, but at some point, Canadian interests have to come first. You just have to say, even if this drives down our voter efficiency or gives us a 3% less chance of a majority next time, we still have to do the right thing. And I think Carney, I have a little bit of hope that he is from Edmonton and will understand that this is a serious problem and will try to build some bridges. He's talked about building in the campaign, so I'm willing to see what happens.
I mean, we have to hope that he does the right thing because it's for the good of the country. But Tasha, an awful lot of the commentariat in central Canada is absolutely dismissive, if not outright antagonistic to this very idea that there's any need to do anything regarding Alberta. And these separatists should just shut up. And why are you doing this? Like,
I don't really see that. I don't. I see some people saying that. But I think most people realize that, as a Quebecer, I will say, having lived through national unity crisis on the east side, it is not pleasant. It is not constructive. It tears people and families apart. It also wrecks business, house values. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that go into separatist sentiment people don't think about. But when you live through that, I lived through 2 referenda. And it's like the second one where I was quite active. It was awful, quite frankly, the anxiety. So no, that sort of stuff should be avoided, frankly. And I think that a lot of people in the East see that and know that from experience, that is not the way to go. And I think Carney would know that too. Just in general, having seen phenomena also around the world. I mean, look at Brexit, for example, the referendum there. He was, quite vocal. It was a bad idea, and he was proven right. I mean, at the end of the day, avoiding a referendum is much better. So you have to avoid a referendum, you have to tamp down the sentiment, and you have to do something. And I think he will do something. I think it's going to revolve around energy. I've heard positive noises from Liberals that is a very big priority for him. And the issue will be convincing Quebec, which I think he will have a chance of doing as well. Legault is seems very happy with Carney as well. And Legault is desperate to, keep himself in power because things are going really sideways for his party. So I think that he will, and if a Liberal government is elected in Quebec, or if a Liberal Party revives there, as they have a provincial election for leader coming up in June, that's also potential allyship. Again, there's, 5 degrees of separation. Josh Ray was a provincial Liberal. They're not the same party as the federal Liberals, but they get along. I think he will get stuff done. The challenge is having the time to do it. So he's in a minority, which is why I honestly think the best thing for him would be to just stack it and create a majority by bringing people in. So he doesn't have to deal with the political bullshit of having to stay in power, curry favor here and there. He would have 4 years to get stuff done, because the stuff that you need to get done will take 4 years to do. Building infrastructure, building an LNG pipeline, all that stuff takes time.
Interesting you mentioned about Legault being more open. Danielle Smith was in Montreal having meetings a couple of weeks ago trying to convince Legault to, for his own political benefit, to build Quebec's energy sector, to tap into their natural gas reserves. And it was, instead of importing from the U.S., this would be energy independence for Quebec. And he's apparently looking at the idea. So that could be an interesting allyship. Does he have to go as far as approving a pipeline? Is it getting rid of the tanker ban on the West Coast, or C-69?
Pipeline. C-69 is part of that, because I don't know how you get the approvals if you're still stuck with it. But a pipeline. I 100% believe he has to do that. That would be the biggest statement. It would also create a lot of jobs. It would be a sign to Alberta that its resources are taken seriously by the rest of the country, and that it's a priority. So, and it would put people to work. It would be an economic activity. Yes, there'd be government money floating around in it, but it would still be an economic activity project, which would be good for the country. So I vote pipeline 100%.
It would be good for steel mills, whether in Ontario or in Edmonton or Regina. That would be good.
Yeah, just to Tasha's point too, like what Carney said during the campaign implies not to repeal C-69, but to redo it. And their argument is that if we just repeal it, all of a sudden you're locked up in court whenever you try to approve something. So the timeline is tough, because you would have to redo this whole legislation, do consultations, then you would have to find a project that you want to go, and then you get to Carney's idea of the one review for a project. Doing that in 2 years seems improbable to me, and that's going to be a tough sell if it is a true minority parliament.
Well, does it stay a minority, or do they poach people, as Tasha is suggesting, to make it a majority?
I am a veteran of Alberta politics, where the Wild Rose floor cross destroyed everyone's career who was involved. And
Not Danielle Smith's.
Yeah, well, it was destroyed for a while.
Get their careers ruined. No, federally, I agree with you, Stuart, but federally, there's ample example of floor crossers who did just fine. And I think in this case, it would be a small herd of floor crossers. It's not just one individual. He'd have to get a group, and he'd have to pitch it on the sense of this is a unity cabinet, a unity government. Even not have them like Elizabeth May's already volunteered, and so I'll be in your cabinet, but I'll still represent my party because you can. Then she'd have to see. That's actually smart because then she'd have to vote with the government because she's in cabinet, right? But she'd still be a Green. You could do that. You could put 3 NDP or even Conservatives in the cabinet, and they'd have to vote with the government, and so you'd have your majority. Boom, done.
Elizabeth May and the Green Party, they are wholly owned subsidiaries of the Liberal Party already. So just count her as a Liberal.
I said she volunteered. She actually did.
Yeah. Elizabeth May should just retire.
You can't look too needy in these situations.
She won her seat, Brian. She won her seat. Pierre did not win his seat.
This is true. This is true. And look, I've heard all the pushback from the federal Conservatives. I'm sure you saw the Andrew Scheer interview that he did. We won more votes than Doug Ford in Ontario. Yeah, but you won fewer seats. Like, you got to count the seats, not the votes. That's the important part that they missed.
Can I raise one really quick thing?
Sure.
Their vote count and their seat count are almost the same. They actually proportional representation. They actually got about 41% of they got 41% of the vote and roughly 41% of the seats. It's very interesting.
It's the Liberals who benefited. They've got 49% of the seats
and
with 43.
Yes, there was more efficient. Yeah.
Is there a chance of this being a short-lived parliament? We always talk about minority parliaments last 6 to 18 months. I think the last 20 years has blown that talking point out of the water, but it still gets dragged out. I've covered the Martin, the 2 Harper, and this is my 6th minority government in the last bunch of years. I think it's a mug's game to try and figure out how long it lasts, Stuart.
Yeah, I agree. And Blanchette has already said he's certainly not going to bring them down in the next year. And usually when you say that, it doesn't mean you're going to do it in 13 months. It means that these parties need time. And the state of the NDP, if you thought it was bad last fall when they wouldn't bring down the government, it's a lot worse now. So they're going to have to get an interim leader, and then they're going to have to figure out their leadership race, which I think will probably go on a little while. And then they're going to have to give that leader some time to get their feet under them. So the NDP is in no position to bring down the government, I would say, within the next 2 years and maybe even longer.
When Aaron O'Toole lost, I had people calling me the morning after saying he's got to go. Do you remember Bert Chen from the Conservative National Council? I think I was the first person he called. I'd never met the man or talked to him, and he's like, this is why Aaron O'Toole has to go. What? I haven't heard that with Polievre yet. There's some speculation about Tim Houston wanting to go.
I've had some people call me and say Pierre has to go. But they're not in decision-making positions, but there's a sentiment. Some people say that he has to go. Tim Houston, that video was very interesting. The timing of it. I haven't seen a draft Tim Houston movement here in Ontario. Maybe there is one that I'm just not in part of a circle, but there's no shortage of pretenders. People saying Jason Kenney put out a lot of big posts on X the last day, and people are like, oh, he's running for what? The job's not open. But I think that conversation is happening. Look, there'll be a vote next Tuesday at caucus as to whether they do a full-on review. He has to have a review at convention. It's like they all do, right? But they're going to do a decision whether the caucus holds a vote. They have like 20%, I think, of signatures of the caucus to mandate a vote like they did with Aaron. They kicked him out.
Yeah, it'll be a listening exercise on Tuesday, I think, for MPs. They want to know what he has to say. And I think most of the people that I've spoken to are pretty receptive to the arguments about, we gained 24 seats and we have this new voter coalition. Our voters are younger. We have the South Asians came to us in big waves, so like immigrant voters. So this is a growing coalition that they see a future for. And I think a lot of MPs are already leaning that way. And they just need Poilievre to get up in front of them and say, look, my fault. Here's how we're going to fix this. And I think if he does that, it's probably fine.
And then he'll have however long this minority or majority, if they listen to Tasha, lasts.
Then he has to find a seat. He's got a big year ahead of him.
All right, we'll leave it on that, and we'll see what happens after this week. Do make sure that you're subscribed and reading the Political Hack newsletter produced by these fine two folks, and make sure that you're hitting the subscribe button for Full Comment. Full Comment is a post-media podcast. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Subscribe on Apple, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. 2 years later, he was still opposition leader, and he lost again to the Pearson Liberals. Despite this, Diefenbaker doesn't resign as leader of the Progressive Conservatives, which put the party in an awkward situation that hasn't really happened before. The typical rules of a Canadian political party were that you stayed leader until you died or resigned. And if you lost twice in a row, you were supposed to do the honorable thing and step aside. But Diefenbaker just didn't, prompting the party to take the unprecedented step of forcing a party convention in Toronto for the singular purpose of crowbarring Diefenbaker out of the leadership. Diefenbaker shows up, pretends everything is fine, and gives a finger-wagging speech chastising his fellow party members for their disloyalty.
I followed this party when I didn't agree with policies. And I gave loyalty to leader after leader, because I believe that there is no other way.
He's politely cheered by the assembled Conservatives and then abjectly humiliated in their subsequent leadership vote. On the first ballot, Diefenbaker gets a distant 5th place, and even then he refuses to admit defeat. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.